Brisbane. I'm Chris Hynes, Strata Consultant with Hynes Legal, former Commissioner, Body Corporate Community Management. With me, as always, Frank Higginson, Partner, Hynes Legal. Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone. I'd say midwinter in the early 20 degrees is a true Queensland winter.
Which makes our air conditioning webinar of last week all the more relevant, I would suggest. Go and have a look at that, everybody, if you want a bit of cooling. Not so much about cooling this week, everyone, but in the vein of everyone's talking about gold medals at the moment, gold, 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 we thought we'd get in on the act as well and go gold, gold, gold committees. And we haven't really bothered with silver and bronze committees. We've only bothered with gold-plated committees. So I suppose what Frank and I are trying to achieve here is how do you get the absolute best out of a committee? A couple of quick couple of quick housekeeping before we kick on. You can ask us a question in the chat today, and we'll do our best to answer that as we go along. If you do have a query for us that's maybe a bit more involved, you can contact us after the event, and we're putting up the link for you to use right now. We have tested that one. It should be working. Waiting. There it is. Just fill in your details there, and that is another way for you to get in touch with us and give us a query after the event. We're almost in August too, Frank. So the August topics will be with everybody, geez, very, very shortly. So stay tuned. Make sure you're registered to get notified of that. All right, Frank, why is a gold-plated committee important? Why do we care?
Because second place is first loser.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
No.
What was it in The Simpsons? It was glorious gold, shameful silver, and boring bronze, I think.
Well, I suppose if we could share Simpson photos, you'd be doing it. It's interesting, and this is really, again, a sort of non-legal session we're doing, but obviously a substantial part of our practice. And as much as we measured the numbers recently, and it's probably half bodies corporate, half management rights at the moment, and a little bit of portion of lot owners there in the middle acting for them. So we're really spread across the board, and we do see, obviously, in that a hell of a lot of committee members acting for them, acting against them, acting for their bodies corporate or whatever. So for me, this is really an interesting one because in our sense, it is what we think makes a good committee and how, I suppose, the mindset people need to be in, and probably some solutions if they want some more education at the back end of this. And absolutely some of this is going to be a little bit aspirational and maybe a little bit ideological in the sense of it's never going to happen, Frank. You're an idiot. Why are you even trying to do this stuff? But if this whole strata industry, and that's what it is, bodies corporate, strata managers, management rights owners, lot owners even, although at a slightly lesser bar, is going to create the community that the Act actually refers to. The committee members have a hell of a lot of responsibility in trying to contribute to that. So I suppose this is our little view of the world of what we think committee members, a good committee looks like. Now, that might not be possible at all the positions. You might only get some of the things, you might have none of them. But I suppose from both Chris and my perspective, from different sides of the fence, like I've been a lawyer for nearly, 30 years next year, including articles. Chris is 5.5 years as commissioner, and then close to 2 years with us, mate, I suppose, 18 months or so. We have seen a lot of it. And that's really what today is about, is really what does make a good committee. How do you go about it? What should you look for? Whether you want to be on it, whether you're looking at your committee or otherwise. And Chris has just disappeared. So there you go. So I'm sure he'll come back in a minute. Given that he's driving the show, he's also posting the questions and the links and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose, I'll start while we wait for him to return from the blue screen that he's become on my screen, at least anyway. I hope you're all still listening and it shows that I'm live. So really where we're at to start with is probably the first realization, and this is one of the brutal realities of committee membership, is that it's not necessarily going to be an easy job all of the time. That's the reality of it. So there's times when, as with any leadership position, in a sense, you're going to be faced with difficult decisions. You're going to be faced with unpalatable decisions. It's going to be a matter of understanding that you are bound by legislation, and you've got certain certainly statutory obligations, and you're even going to have contractual ones in the sense of, oh, cool, thank you, Julia. Well, hopefully Chris will join us again soon. Hey, here he is.
I have no idea what happened there.
No, mate, it's like, what's that, Roswell? What's the Area 51? Just disappeared.
Yep.
I've been talking, Julia's confirmed that she heard me, you're now back, and I was just talking about getting the right headspace in terms of how committee roles.
Excellent.
It's not the easiest thing to do. You're going to have to do things that you might not want to do. And you certainly, well, even this way, I suppose anyone who volunteers in any not-for-profit organisation, which is what a body corporate certainly is. I do stuff at my golf club. Chris is chair of the Nunda.
Yep. The Northside Connect, bit of a plug there.
Connect. Yep, no, plug. All of that is for free. Chris isn't getting paid for his Nunda stuff. I'm not getting paid at the golf club. Committee members, 99.9 times out of the 100, aren't getting paid at committee level. And you're going out of your way to put yourself in a position where you're not necessarily going to have always the fun times, because it's certainly going to be a commitment. So that first bit is, as much as it can be made easier by surrounding yourself with the right people, it's not necessarily always going to be the easiest position to put yourself in. So there's the first reality of committees.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, what makes a gold-plated committee then? What do we think it is, Frank? I guess these are things that we have talked about over a period of time, and we've seen work and we've seen not work and all the rest of it. So what's the first thing, Frank?
What's the headspace bit I just covered. So
what's the second thing? See, this is what happens when you have a technical failure.
Yes, being responsive, that other thing. And this is, I suppose, in a sense, same sort of line I use with clients all the time, use with my daughter as she's coming through from time to time. It's sort of monsters hide in the dark, in the sense of, and this is not so much for committees, but it's for people that have requested things of committees, the failure to respond and the failure to react and manage communications and let people know what's going on leads people to have no other, depends which way your mindset is, people head down, what's the worst case scenario? And the worst case scenario is things are going to turn out badly for me. So what we think a good committee absolutely does is response, answers questions, comes back to owners, deals with what it needs to deal with. It doesn't just let someone fire in a request and maybe 8 weeks later acknowledge it. And Chris is gone again. So whatever's going on at Nunda today, I'll keep going because that's it. So it's that communication piece. It's been responsive in one hand and it's also communicating on the other. So updates, town hall forums, information nights. And one of the things that we're getting quite proactive on for bodies corporates we're acting for, a lot of owners, even resident managers as well, for things, but particularly bodies corporates, for things that are contentious in nature. There's no reason to leave the conversation around that contentious issue for the night of the meeting itself. So absolutely, we from a legal perspective need to have general meetings to approve things at body corporate level, enter into things and whatever, get that, that's what has to happen. But from a committee perspective, if you're doing something that is going to cause potential division, and that's the reality of body corporate, it's going to happen from time to time, there is no reason why you can't run an educative process with your owners, do it town hall forums or otherwise. Chris has done a couple of these things where you say to people, okay, in 2 months' time, we're going to be voting about changing the colour of the building. So here's some information nights around whatever it might be. And obviously that might, I suppose, Chris, one of the lead cases for maintenance versus improvements is about changing the colour of a building in the Brisbane CBD.
Yep.
So there's so that communication piece is really important. So in that sense, a good committee isn't really passive. They react when they need to react, and they control the message when they need to control the message, and they get ahead of the problems that they know are coming.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, I'll leave
Apologies.
you to your favourite point for whatever's going on over at Nunderus, and we've got internet issues over there, but there you go.
Yeah. Sorry about that, everyone. Not really sure what's going on. The next one is, as you say, gosh, can everyone, if anyone's out there and you can hear me, you just put up a virtual hand.
You're getting a little bit glitchy, mate.
I'll keep going. The next one we're talking about is about committing. So if you're a committee member, that literally means that you're someone who commits. Isn't that right, Frank?
It is, mate. You're glitching, so I don't know what you do, but yeah. So this is one of Chris's big things is always about the origin of words. So committee comes back from committing, believe it or not. So very simple. So in that sense, and again, this might be one of the more, what would you call it? Aspirational elements of what we're talking about today, because we see this a lot, people on committees that don't actually contribute. So they put their hand up to do it. They might do it because they're a friend of the chairperson. Who knows? They feel like doing it. The body corporate manager said, "Hey, we need to make up the minimum number. We need to have 3 people," and they put their hand in. They put their hand up to do it. And so, in that sense, I suppose you're committing to get the numbers, but you're not necessarily committing in terms of doing the job. So those things become problematic over time. So, you know, and I suppose the legislation requires that there are 3 committee members, and if there aren't 3 committee members, then there's a process to go through about Part 5 arrangements with body corporate managers and all that sort of stuff. It's a bit of a difficult issue, because if no one wants to put their hand up, the government can't make people put their hand up either, as much as the legislation's driven towards self-governance. So one of the issues that we do see from time to time for committees with what you'd call extremely passive members is that because they don't involve themselves, getting vox across the line is difficult. Actually making committee decisions can become difficult because you need to have people that are entitled to vote sometimes to get things across the line. And it's just sort of that baggage. And the other thing is, when you actually do get issues that come up and you do need contributions from everyone to try to get to what the outcome you're looking for, become really difficult. So, Chris, test your sound.
Test. It's still bad, isn't it?
It is.
Frank, keep talking, and I'll put stuff on the chat.
Righto, cool, easy. So the next one then, part of it, we think a good committee, in one sense, knows what their responsibilities are, and that's both legally, but even more internally, it's who's doing what. Is everyone responsible for every bit of it or not? So if you've got a committee of 7, like from my perspective, what good committees tend to do, particularly for projects, is not everyone needs to be involved in every single investigation around a particular issue. So you might have, we're going to redo the tiling around the pool. We want to go get some quotes for it. Not all 7 people need to run around getting those quotes. What you might do is have 2 of the committee members be the subcommittee. They go figure out what's out there, come back with go get quotes, talk to experts, work with the resident manager, do it around timing, etc., etc., etc. And excuse me, and then come back to the full committee with, okay, this is what we've got. Here's what we think we should do, and then the full committee then makes that decision. So that's that sort of almost, you'd say, political sense, like in cabinet. You know, it's sort of, you go to the federal government, state government, they've got individual portfolios and individual responsibilities. Not everyone's making a decision on every single issue. That department comes up with those recommendations, and then the whole of the government might make a decision on something. So in a committee sense, obviously at a much lesser scale, that also makes a lot of sense in terms of actually getting things done and help share the workload. And that's a problem then when you've got bigger buildings and lesser committees and you've only got a couple of people to do all the heavy lifting. That can become very draining after a period of time. The other part with that, to me, and one of my favourite things that Chris will put up in a minute, Donald Rumsfeld, who actually passed away a month or so ago, has an infamous quote about I think the invasion of Iraq by the US in 2001 or thereabouts about known and unknown unknowns. I think that applies equally to, I mean, all the things we do, not the least of which is law, but also at a committee level perspective. So the reality is, if you're watching this, you've got an interest in learning more, which is a bloody good place to start. Where we see a lot of committees come croppers is they're charging off relentlessly into something for which they don't have the expertise and which they don't know that they don't have the expertise, under the mistaken assumption that it'll be okay when we figure it out, particularly around some of the more contentious decisions at committee level we see. So I think part of it from a committee perspective is making sure you know what you don't know. You educate yourself to the greatest possible degree. And Chris has thrown up a couple of links there, certainly to the Rumsfeld one. And there's also a link to what newsletter I wrote when I linked it up from 6 years ago about the different committee roles and what they are. And interestingly enough, when you read that, if you're interested enough to do so, the Act actually doesn't say what the committee roles. So for example, it doesn't say the Secretary is going to do these things. It certainly gives the chairperson a couple of additional powers in relation to ruling motions out of order at general meetings and things like that, but that's it. So inside that committee framework, it's really up to you to decide who's doing what. Next, and I suppose this would have been one of Chris's lines, a good film is usually defined by the quality of its cast, ensemble or otherwise. So Vivien Leigh was great in Gone with the Wind, but because of the great support cast around her. There you go, movie buff. So in that same sense, a good committee probably doesn't have, ideally, a bunch of yes people sitting around the table. Like, the reality is that a diversity of opinions makes sense. Having everyone in furious agreement with every decision, to me, probably means that you're not necessarily going to have the best decision-making process. That's the reality of it, because you're not taking into account alternative points of view and the way other people might look at things. So, and probably more than anything else, this is one of the ones that, and this is just the nature of the committee beast, it's hard enough getting volunteers to do this stuff anyway. If you've got a particularly strong-minded person on a committee, they tend to attract people that want to work with that sort of person. And again, because it's a volunteer position, there's no money in it for people and it's only potential grief or otherwise. What tends to happen is anyone who might have a contrary view says, you know what, I've got better things to do on my weekends and my nights. You know, I might go stick needles in my eyes. That's more fun than put up with you. So from a committee perspective, it's much better to have a cast of people that don't necessarily always agree with each other all the time, but can respectfully work out differences of opinion and perhaps even put up votes occasionally. Okay, well, we're not sure. And then I suppose more importantly, not take it personally when you don't necessarily get your way. It's a really important part of the program. And the last one, we think from a committee perspective, and this is a little bit subjective, I suppose, in a sense, it's having good internal and external relationships with service providers like ourselves, and also your body corporate manager, particularly your resident manager, ideally as well. So ARAMA, which is the peak management rights body, uses the phrase triangle of management, where ideally there's 3 legs on the stool. Committee's one, body corporate managers another, resident managers the other, and together they give that stability. And run right, that is the case. Of course, if you're in a smaller building, you might not have management rights, and in some senses you might not even have a body corporate manager. But in that sense, what a good body corporate manager will do is always provide some guidance around do this, don't do that, perhaps get here or otherwise. You know what I mean? So it's a matter of working with the right people that are on your wavelength. Sometimes not everyone's on the same wavelength, and away you go. So, you know, they're the 5 things we're really sort of talking about as being what we think are the key, well, what a good committee looks like. And the question now is, how do you actually get there? So, you know, it doesn't happen by accident. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of lobbying, a little bit of managing of people and convincing them to come on board, perhaps without the line of this is the easiest job in the world, all you've got to do is vote yes to everything I put forward. And it does take some effort, I suppose, to be able to create that sort of feeling inside your body corporate. It starts with, I suppose, communication, recognising there should be some different perspectives and gathering the right people and understanding who the people are that potentially might want to be part of that gig. So the reality is, and this is something that, you know, what we are working on, and this is what these things are really about, is that there's no minimum standard for committee membership in Queensland. Your sole qualification to put your hand up is at a general meeting. It might be that you don't even need to be a lot owner. You can be a representative of a lot owner under some form of arrangement. So you don't even need a financial interest. There's no required training and education to be on a committee. There's talk about that from time to time, but I don't know, Chris, legislatively, let's test your sound again. You're in the Commissioner's chair for quite some time. Do you think that's ever realistic that there'll be an obligation to do committee training to be on a committee?
I reckon it'd be great.
Yeah, no, he's still broken, but great idea. But whether it happens or not is something else. So so really, this is part of it in terms of what we're talking about. What is out there is the Commissioner's Office has created a little education tool, I suppose, which runs you through body corporate basics. Chris will put up a link to that. And he's posting some comments there as we go. So I suppose it's my job to answer the questions today, isn't it? Yeah, we're talking about business being a body corporate being a business, you know, and business relationships don't necessarily all derive themselves from mutual friendship over a number of decades. You're in a business together. You've got to try to get an outcome, and body corporate committees are no different. So, from a education perspective, there is absolutely a online portal for the Commissioner's Office, which does a bit of training. So, and as a simple version, all of the people that start with us, staff, judicial lawyers or otherwise, we ask them to do that because this is all we do. So the more you understand about what it is that you're doing, the better off you actually are. But I suppose this is part of it, which if Chris's sound was on, it would be better. One of the things that is on our radar for the next 6 months really is to come up with a training program for committee members. And obviously, and not obviously, that would be facilitated by Chris. So in terms of, it's a pretty easy conversation in the sense of who better to be training your committee than the fellow that was the former Commissioner for Body Corporate and Community Management. And as I've said quite a bit, no one ever rang the Commissioner's office, and probably no one still does, Chris, to say, I'm so glad I bought that unit, I'm really happy. All it is people complaining about various issues. So in terms of understanding the things that committee members should know, need to know, and more than anything else, how to run this business that is a body corporate, that is where we're going, and that is what Chris will be running. So even, and mate, it might be, or it might not be, one of the things that Chris does for body corporate managers quite a bit from time to time is seminars on decision making. And that's not a legal thing. That's not what section 264 of the Act says. It's around how you make, in a sense, a defensible decision at a body corporate level. Because the issue that body corporate committees and bodies corporates as a whole face and will continue to face is they can't make unreasonable decisions. And to the extent that they do, they can be overturned. So that is a methodology, in a sense, not in a sense it is, a methodology to go through a decision-making process to get to a decision that allows the committee, if they're ever challenged on it, to say, well, that we went through this process and we got to there and this is how. Which is better than, and we're back to what we spoke about here at the start, knee-jerk no's. No, well, why? Like we've client this morning, a body corporate trying to get a resolution without dissent across the line. One person voted against it, and we know they voted against it for a reason that's not reasonable. So we're about to now go through the inevitable 10-month process of a Commissioner's Office application to have those dissenting votes overturned because they were cast for reasons that weren't necessarily commercial or reasonable. So where you want to be from a committee perspective is in the position where you've made a reasonable decision. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be right. That's, and as again, come back to that adjudication decisions up in North Queensland, Chris, where the adjudicator said everyone's entitled to opinion, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And we have, interestingly enough, worked through this together with a client not that long ago on a contentious issue. both Chris and I around the committee meeting table talking about where they needed to go, and they said, well, would this be okay? Well, yes. Would this be okay? Yes. Would this be okay? Yes. So there was 3 decisions that would have all been reasonable in the circumstances, which when you come back to why they were being forced to make that decision, which in a sense was trying to unscramble an egg, gave them defensibility. So this is what we did. This is how we approached it. Here's the melting pot of ideas that we had to consider, and this is the outcome we came to. So it's very hard to criticise that for being unreasonable, because there was a process they followed that had a whole bunch of steps in it. So that's one part of the program that Chris will be offering. And dare I say it, I mean, there's obviously an educative piece to it, Chris, in terms of the basics of body corporate terminology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's those things like decision making that aren't taught, trained, considered anywhere. And that, dead set, is where we see most body corporates come unstuck. Is poor decisions, which can come from poor decision making and poor processes. You know, and I suppose part of it is garbage in, garbage out. If you put in a load of rubbish into a decision-making process, you're not going to get a good outcome at the back end. If you've got the right questions and understanding of the issues at the start, you're going to get a whole lot better outcome at the back end. So that's really where we're both coming from. So, you know, and I suppose, but the outcome will eventually be is that there's less commissions office applications, ideally, particularly for those people that participate in this, because they're going to have a far better process to deal with what it is that they should be doing. So one of those things too that we're both getting better at, I suppose, is telling clients that they're wrong. And that's the unfortunate reality of our situation from time to time. I'd love to be a cheerleader and say that every client we've got makes every decision right. That's just not the case. So sometimes the methods, the issues in the delivery itself in terms of how we actually do that, which is fine. I can be fairly blunt at times. So maybe dressing up a little bit other than that's just wrong, but that's the reality. And that's what we're trying to unscramble with these sort of things. And that's what we'll definitely be trying to unscramble with committee training. So, you know, I suppose it's not, you know, if you come back to where we started, what makes a good committee, I think we've laid out there. Whether that can be the case in your building is going to depend on the people involved and their willingness to contribute and so on and so forth. And you know, I think probably from my personal perspective, I feel much better being part of a team than being a sort of solo sailor. So teamwork might be one way to sell that, but you'd know the people that are in your building and otherwise. And then it's a matter of actually even coming up with an agenda and running your body corporate like you would your business. That's one of the big things. So there's a business element to this as well. So, you know, where we would love to get to is where committees and bodies corporates operate like a very well-oiled machine. That might be a little bit idealistic, not necessarily going to be the easiest thing in the world to get there, but this is where we're starting. So I've now got the sun shining on my face, the sun gets lower or whatever in the afternoon. So yeah, so really, I suppose we're throwing this out there now without Chris pitching it because of his lack of audio, but that's fine. The link is there for any of you that might be interested in exploring what that training might look like. So at a very formative stage of it, we've certainly got ideas what it should look like. We've got a program ready. But we're always looking for guinea pigs, in a sense, of clients to participate in it. So this is really the first time we've sort of thrown it out there publicly. So if you are interested in hearing about it, there's the link at the top of the comment section there. Fire that in at us and we will get back to you. But in the meantime, I suppose we're looking at our EDM for this month later on this afternoon. So if you're on our list, you'll get next month's topics again. There's a very specific management rights one, which I'm doing on my own because Chris is in sunny Tasmania doing a whiskey tour. We're talking about, no, actually I won't, I'll leave that. So we've got 4 good topics yet again. So I'd love to see you there. So other than that, hang on, have we got any questions here? We do have some questions, so I'll do those. Mr. SNB. Yeah, remuneration of committee members, absolutely. So I've got a newsletter half written on this. I just haven't quite finalised it yet. Committee members can be paid for what they do. And the only way that can happen other than reimbursement of a very small amount of expense, which I think, Chris, is $300 in 12 months, there you go, is that you must nominate, and the condition of your nomination is that you will be paid. So if you nominate for chairperson at 100 grand a year and people vote you in on that basis, then you got the job. But what comes with that is taxation issues for you, taxation issues for the body corporate, work health and safety issues for you, because if you're not a volunteer, you don't have the protections that volunteers do under the work health and safety legislation. So suddenly you're in the frame personally if something goes wrong. And there's some other ancillary issues that flow to it from a body corporate perspective. So it happens occasionally, probably not as often as I think it probably could. And that the reason I haven't punched out that newsletter yet is because there's actually a whole lot of moving parts to it in terms of the consequences of doing it that way. So money might be a motive, can motivate people. And the other thing is it probably does raise the bar a little bit in terms of accountability, is what I would say. So if you're getting paid for a job, the standard to which you perform it, in my mind at least, should be higher. And that's probably in a way that adjudicators would look at it as well. There's a couple of cases where adjudicators have gone a little bit there, in terms of the altruistic society that body corporates are supposed to be. Gleno, we bought a home in a body corporate, but the processes, bylaw, politics are so complex. Is there a better way? Mate, possibly, but here we are. This legislation's been around since 1997, so it's 25 years next year, and we're currently going through a review at what it's looked like next. So, mate, the reality is Strata's here to stay, and as Chris always said, way before I met him, it's impossible to regulate human behaviour. Legislation will never be able to do that. So, so on that sense, Chris, thank you for your contribution today. Thank you everyone for joining us yet again. If you're interested in that service, fire that in upstairs on the comments. Hopefully next week we'll have Chris's audio sorted, and you'll get our EDM in the next couple of days with what we've got coming for the next month. So as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, and Chris, part of it. Waving goodbye. See you next week.